Peyton Daniels was 2 hours into her shift at Bean and Bloom Café when she handed the wrong drink to the man who would ruin her life in the best possible way. "Here you go," she said, sliding the tall iced caramel macchiato across the counter with a tired smile. "1 oat milk, 2 pumps vanilla. Actually," the man said, glancing down at the cup, "I ordered a hot Americano." Peyton blinked, then looked at the sticker on the side of the cup. "Crap. Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she said, flustered, already reaching for another cup. "I have been running on no sleep," and she gestured at the growing line behind him. "It's been one of those mornings." The man didn't look annoyed, though. In fact, he smiled. "It's all right," he said, voice deep, calm. "I like surprises." Peyton looked up for the first time, and her breath caught. He was gorgeous. Sharp jawline, windswept dark blonde hair, expensive-looking coat. His eyes, gray like thunderclouds, looked amused. "I'll still make your Americano," she stammered, already grabbing a fresh cup. "I'll take both," he said easily, pulling out his sleek black card. "And throw in a muffin, whatever kind you'd pick." Peyton blinked again. "You want me to pick your muffin?" He leaned slightly forward. "You got my drink wrong. I'm trusting you with the muffin." She bit her lip to keep from smiling as she grabbed a blueberry one, her favorite, and bagged it. "All right, but if you hate it, I'm not taking the blame. I'll let you know tomorrow," he said. She paused, halfway through ringing him up. "Tomorrow," he gave a small shrug. "I like this place and I like the barista." His eyes flicked to her name tag. "Peyton," she laughed under her breath, warm all of a sudden. "Well, have a good day. You too, Peyton." He walked out with both drinks, and she turned to the next customer, trying not to feel like she'd just met someone important. She didn't know that 20 minutes later, her manager would tell her that the man she gave the wrong drink to was Winston Prescott of Prescott Tech. A millionaire. A real one, not the flashy TikTok kind, the kind who owned buildings. "You're kidding," Peyton said, almost dropping the pitcher of steamed milk. "Nope," said her coworker Mia, pulling up a photo on her phone. "That's him, Winston Prescott. He's been on Forbes 30 under 30 list for like 3 years. "I gave him oat milk," Peyton muttered, horrified. "And he smiled," Mia said, grinning. "Girl, he didn't just smile, he looked like you handed him gold." Peyton groaned, but all day she couldn't stop replaying the way he'd looked at her. Like she wasn't just another barista in a green apron and worn-out sneakers. The next morning he came back. She noticed him the second he walked in, tall, confident, wearing a charcoal coat and watch that probably cost more than her rent. Peyton tried not to panic as she approached the counter. "Let me guess, hot Americano, and a blueberry muffin," he added. "You were right about it." She relaxed a little, punching in his order. "Well, I have excellent taste. I got that impression." He watched her as she worked, and she could feel his eyes on her, curious, amused, like she was the interesting part of his day. "Do you always work mornings?" he asked when she handed him the drink. "Most days," she said. "Why?" "Because I'm not a morning person," he said, sipping the drink. "But now I have a reason to be." Peyton stared at him, caught off guard. He held her gaze. "Let me take you to dinner," she blinked. "Is this your way of forgiving me for the wrong drink?" "No," he said slowly. "This is me hoping you'll give me a right one at a restaurant with you sitting across from me." Peyton hesitated. She'd never been on a date with someone like him. He was money and power and polished charm. She was rent-strapped, working 2 jobs and figuring out how to afford grad school, but he wasn't pretending. He wasn't playing, and something about the way he looked at her, like she was more than just her apron, made her say, "Okay." "Dinner," he smiled again, slow and real. "Friday, Friday." He walked out with his Americano, and she watched him go, her heart racing. Friday came faster than she expected. She'd borrowed a dress from Mia, curled her hair, and tried not to feel like an imposter as she waited outside the restaurant he'd sent a car to bring her to. And then he stepped out of a sleek black car, wearing a navy suit that made him look unfairly good. "You look incredible," he said before she could even say hi. "You clean up okay too," she said, trying to sound casual. He laughed, and they walked into the restaurant, one of those rooftop places with chandeliers and glass walls, the kind of place she'd never dared to step foot in. The host greeted Winston by name. Their table was private, near a window overlooking the city lights. "You really are a millionaire," she murmured once they sat. He looked at her. Does that make this weird? She shook her head. No, it makes it surprising. But you don't act like one, he smiled. That's the goal. The night passed in a blur of champagne, laughter, and questions that felt more like confessions. She told him about her dream to open her own therapy practice. He told her about how he hated boardrooms but loved building things that helped people. I like you, Peyton, he said when dessert arrived, some fancy chocolate thing with gold flakes. I don't usually do this. Date girls who mess up your coffee, he grinned. No. Date girls who make me want to skip meetings just to see them smile. She felt her heart flip. Then it's a good thing I'm an excellent barista, she whispered. He leaned closer. You're a lot more than that, and in that moment she believed him. The car he sent her home in had soft leather seats and a little note waiting on the seat beside her. Can't wait to see you again. She held it in her hands the whole ride home, her chest aching in the best kind of way. She had no idea what she'd just stepped into. But whatever it was, it felt like the beginning of something big. Peyton hadn't expected to see Winston again so soon. Not the next day, and definitely not stepping into Bean and Bloom at closing time when the chairs were already flipped onto tables and the espresso machine was halfway disassembled. She was sweeping near the pastry case when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, startled, and her breath caught when she saw him. Winston didn't wear a suit this time. Instead, he had on a gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans, but the quiet confidence still clung to him like a tailored coat. He held a brown paper bag, and his eyes found hers with the same unwavering focus that had unsettled her since their first meeting. You're not here for coffee, she said, leaning on the broom handle. Not tonight, he replied, holding up the bag. I brought something for you, she hesitated. I'm still on the clock. I'll wait. He sat at the table near the window without asking, like he belonged there. Peyton glanced at the clock, 15 minutes until close. She swept faster. When the last chair was down and the lights were dimmed, she slid into the seat across from him. All right, what's in the mystery bag? He pulled out 2 containers and a small bottle of sparkling elderflower soda. There's a little place in Chelsea that does these ridiculous truffle knock-eye bowls. Thought you might need dinner. Peyton blinked at him, surprised. You brought me food. You skipped lunch yesterday, I noticed. She opened the container. The smell was heavenly. You're observant. I try to be, he said, tearing a napkin in half and sliding one to her. Especially when someone refuses to eat between 12 and 5. She dipped her fork in, trying to seem nonchalant, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. Winston studied the cafe's walls like he was cataloging everything. You ever think about owning something like this? Peyton paused with the fork halfway to her mouth. Why? Feels like your kind of place, warm, thoughtful, a little chaotic, but solid. He met her eyes. Like you, she stared down at her food. You're oddly good at reading people. He leaned back in his chair. That wasn't reading, that was noticing. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the kind that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Then she asked, Why are you really here? He didn't flinch. I wanted to see you. You just saw me 2 nights ago. That wasn't enough, she put her fork down. Winston, I'm not used to this. Whatever this is, I know. I've had people like you walk into this cafe before. They don't usually notice the staff's names, let alone bring them dinner. I'm not people like me, he said. She raised an eyebrow. That sentence doesn't make sense. It does if you know what I mean. She studied him. You're not trying to impress me. No. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to learn you, he said simply. The way you watch people, the way you don't interrupt, the way you hold your breath when you're thinking. Peyton's stomach flipped. That's intense. I've been accused of worse. She smiled despite herself. You're strange, Winston Prescott. I've been called worse too. They finished eating, and he helped her take the trash out like it was the most natural thing in the world. When they stepped outside, the street was quiet, city lights glowing like embers. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't lean in. He just looked at her. You don't have to be anyone but yourself around me, Peyton, he said. I wasn't planning to be. Good. She turned to unlock her bike from the pole. You going to follow me home next? No, but I am going to call you tomorrow to ask if you want to go to a gallery opening. A gallery, my sister's work. She's pretentious but talented. And you want me there? I want you everywhere, he said without hesitation. She stared at him, unsure how to respond, so she didn't. She just nodded once and got on her bike. As she pedaled down the street, she didn't look back. But her cheeks were warm and her heart was pounding. The next evening, she found herself standing outside an art space that looked more like a warehouse than a gallery. Concrete floors, exposed beams, and people who wore silence like a fashion accessory. Winston was already inside, speaking with a tall woman in a black jumpsuit who shared his jawline but none of his warmth. He broke away when he saw Peyton. "You came," I said I would. His eyes flicked over her. "You look like you belong here. I feel like a fraud." "You're not." His sister joined them, glass of wine in hand. "So you're the girl who made Winston skip a flight to Berlin." Peyton's eyebrows shot up. "I didn't know there was a flight involved." "There was," his sister said dryly. "He canceled it after your dinner." Winston cut in. "Peyton, this is Scarlett. Scarlett, be polite." "I am polite," Scarlett said, then turned to Peyton. "You must be interesting if he's putting off investors." "I'm just me," Peyton replied. Scarlett tilted her head. "That's usually enough." Later, as they stood in front of a massive abstract piece that looked like a hurricane made of copper wire, Winston asked, "You overwhelmed yet?" "Less than I thought I'd be. You're good at pretending you're comfortable." "Maybe I'm just getting used to being uncomfortable," he nodded. "That's where the real things live." She glanced at him. "You always talk like that, only when I want someone to remember what I said." Peyton looked back at the sculpture. "I'll remember." He didn't say anything after that. He just stood next to her, silent and solid, while the world moved around them, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was watching life happen from the outside. She felt like she was in the middle of something that mattered. Peyton's days blurred into one another after the gallery. Between morning shifts, late-night coursework, and the occasional meal that Winston somehow always managed to time perfectly, her world tilted. Not in a loud, chaotic way, but with the quiet certainty of a tide pulling her somewhere she hadn't planned to go. She hadn't expected to see him again until the weekend. But on Thursday afternoon, just as she finished a 3-hour practicum seminar, Winston's driver, yes, he had a driver, was standing outside the campus gates, holding a small white envelope with her name on it. Inside was a single line, handwritten in dark ink. "I thought you could use a sky view." Attached was a keycard. Peyton didn't ask questions. She just followed the address written beneath the note, an address that led her to an impossibly tall building in Midtown. The elevator required the keycard to access the top floor. When the doors opened, she stepped directly into a penthouse that didn't look like it belonged to anyone under 40. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, and not a single surface was cluttered. Winston stood near the edge of the balcony, his sleeves rolled, tie gone, one hand resting casually on the railing. "I almost didn't come," she said, stepping outside. He glanced over his shoulder. "But you did." "What is this?" she asked. A pause, he said. "You've been running nonstop all week." She leaned on the railing beside him. "You've been keeping track." "I notice patterns," he said, "and when they start to fray," Peyton frowned. "You don't think that's a little intense?" "No," he said. "I think it's rare to care about someone before there's a reason to, but I do." She turned to face him. "You barely know me." "That's not true. You know details," she said. "You've observed me, but you don't know the parts of me that aren't polished." "I don't want polished," he said. "I want the parts you think you have to hide." The wind shifted her hair across her face. He didn't move to touch it, didn't try to cross the line she hadn't invited him across. She looked out over the skyline. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you," she laughed, but it was quieter this time. "I used to think people like you were born with their lives mapped out." Winston shook his head. "I spent most of my childhood trying to disappear into the background. My father only noticed me when I made a mistake." He glanced at her. "Do you still think I have it all figured out?" "No," she admitted, "but you fake it really well." He gave a half shrug. "Habit." They stood in silence for a moment before he asked, "Do you want to see something strange?" Peyton raised an eyebrow. "Define strange." He stepped back inside and returned with 2 helmets. "Don't tell me you keep a motorcycle parked on the roof." "Even better." he said, leading her through a concealed door near the kitchen. It opened to a private rooftop terrace bare except for a glass dome that housed a flight simulator. "You're kidding." "I'm not. You fly?" "I don't have a license," he said, "but I've logged hours, mostly simulations. It helps me think." She stared at the machine. "You take rich guy hobbies to a whole new level." "It's not about the money," he said. "It's about control. When everything else feels unsteady, I like knowing a lever will always respond the same way." She looked at him then, really looked, the way his jaw tightened before he spoke, the way his hands stilled at his sides like he was holding something back. "You're scared of things you can't manage," she said, "only the important ones." She stepped into the simulator without asking. "Show me how it works," he blinked. "You want to try? You said it helps you think. Maybe it'll help me too." They sat side by side, screens lighting up around them. As he guided her through the basics, their arms brushed once neither of them pulled away. After 20 minutes of simulated flight over digital oceans, she turned to him. "You build things," she said softly, "but I think you're still trying to outrun something." His throat shifted. "Maybe I am." She didn't press. She didn't have to. That night he drove her home himself. No driver, no car service. Just Winston, quiet behind the wheel of a sleek, low car that purred like it had secrets. When they reached her apartment, he didn't get out. Peyton unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move. "You've been patient." "I don't want to mess this up," she nodded. "Neither do I." He looked at her then, not like a man waiting for permission, but like someone who hadn't expected to want anything this badly. She leaned over. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. It was slow, deliberate, and full of all the words neither of them had figured out how to say. When she pulled away, his breathing was uneven. "I'll see you soon," she whispered. "Don't make me wait too long." She slipped out of the car and didn't look back until she was inside. Upstairs, she leaned against her door, heart hammering. There was something terrifying about wanting someone who could change everything, but even scarier was the fact that she wanted him anyway. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of falling. She was afraid of what would happen if she didn't. The first crack appeared on a Wednesday. Peyton was folding towels in the back room of the café when a courier arrived with an envelope marked Prescott Holdings. Her name was written in neat script across the front. She opened it slowly, her pulse rising. Inside, there was a letterhead memo, a formal invitation to a private gala at the Langford Hotel. Black tie. Benefiting the Prescott Foundation for Mental Health Access. Winston's name was at the bottom, beneath the words event chair. She stared at it for a long time, longer than she probably should have, not because of the event itself, but because he hadn't mentioned any of it. Later that evening, when she knocked on the penthouse door, she wasn't wearing a smile. Winston opened it barefoot, with a glass of something golden in his hand and papers spread out behind him in a mess that looked very unlike him. "I got your invitation," she said, holding it up. He stepped aside to let her in. "I was going to tell you. When? Tonight. I was waiting for you to finish your shift." She walked past him, her eyes catching a glimpse of architectural sketches on his table, something that looked like a wellness center, sprawling and modern. "You're throwing a gala for mental health access," he nodded. "It's personal. You could have told me. I didn't want you to feel pressured to go, or like I was parading you around. I'm not a secret, Winston. I know that." She looked at him, waiting. He set the glass down. "My mother struggled with depression before she passed. She never got the help she needed. That's why I fund clinics in underserved areas, why I built out the foundation." Peyton's anger softened, but it didn't disappear. "You said you wanted me to be part of your world. That means sharing things before I find out from a courier." He ran a hand through his hair, the first sign he was unraveling. "You're right. I'm not mad that you're doing this. I think it's incredible. But I can't keep guessing how to exist in your life. You shouldn't have to." There was a long pause. "Will you come?" he asked finally. She met his gaze. "Only if you introduce me as someone who matters. I wouldn't call you anything else." 3 nights later, she stepped out of a car in front of the Langford Hotel, her hand trembling slightly against the clutch Mia had loaned her. The building stretched into the sky, lit like something out of a dream, and a red carpet unfurled up its steps. Winston was waiting inside near the grand staircase. wearing a black tuxedo that made him look like he belonged in every room she'd never dared to enter. When he saw her, his entire expression changed, not with surprise or admiration, but with something deeper. Relief. Like he hadn't let himself breathe until that moment, he walked straight to her and offered his arm. "You showed up," he said quietly. "You asked me to." He leaned closer. "You look like the reason people stop in the middle of conversations. And you," she said, glancing at him, "look like a man who's about to make a very expensive donation." "I already did," he said. "You're here." The ballroom was filled with people who knew Winston by reputation: investors, board members, media figures. Peyton stood beside him, her back straight, her smile practiced, but she never once let go of his hand. During his speech, she watched him speak with clarity and gravity, weaving personal loss into purpose without slipping into performance. For the first time, she didn't see the man who'd walked into her café with the wrong drink order. She saw someone who carried invisible weight and turned it into something that mattered. When the applause died down and the music began again, he found her near the back column, away from the crush of guests. "I hate these things," he said under his breath. "You didn't look like you hated it." "I've gotten good at pretending." She tilted her head. "I'm learning that about you." He looked at her then, really looked. "I don't want to pretend with you." "Then don't." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a velvet box, her breath caught. "I bought this last week," he said. "Not because I had a plan, but because I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if I didn't take the risk." He opened it. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, simple, understated, with a single sapphire in the center. "I don't want to scare you," he said quietly, "but I needed you to know this isn't something I'm half in on." She looked down at the bracelet, then back at him. "I don't scare easily," she said, letting him fasten it around her wrist. "Not anymore." They didn't dance that night. Instead, they left before dessert and walked through Central Park in silence, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. At the edge of the lake, she stopped. "You could have had anyone," she said softly. "I didn't want anyone. I wanted the girl who gave me the wrong drink and didn't apologize for being real." She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you're not afraid I'll mess up again?" "I'm counting on it." She laughed, the sound a little breathless. "You're ridiculous." He stepped closer until there was nothing between them but air and the weight of everything they hadn't said. "I love you," he said. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't grand, it was honest. Her hands found the lapels of his coat. "I love you too," she whispered. "Even when you talk in metaphors." He kissed her under the trees, where no one could see them, where nothing else mattered. The next morning, she woke up in his arms in a sunlit room that didn't feel like a stranger's space anymore. She reached for her phone and saw a calendar alert. "Meeting with architect, Midtown Clinic site review 2 p.m. She turned to him. "You're building another," he rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "A new location. I want your input." "Why?" "Because you know what people need." She curled into his side. "You sure you want me involved?" "I'm sure I don't want to do anything without you." And in that moment, beneath high ceilings and quiet certainty, she realized something. She hadn't just handed the wrong drink to a millionaire. She'd handed it to the man who would change the rest of her life, and let her change his in return. Winston stood at the edge of the construction site, the wind tugging at the collar of his jacket as he watched steel beams rise against the autumn sky. The Midtown Clinic was finally breaking ground, and for the first time in years, the foundation didn't feel like a legacy to shoulder, it felt like a future he'd chosen. Peyton was walking the perimeter with one of the site coordinators, a yellow hard hat perched over her curls and a clipboard in hand. She gestured toward the open framework of what would soon be the intake lobby, speaking with confidence, her voice carrying above the machinery. He watched her with quiet pride, not because she was impressive, though she was, but because she belonged here, not just beside him. In this, building something real. As she approached, she lifted the helmet and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "They're 2 days behind schedule," she said, handing him the clipboard. "But it's manageable. The suppliers are rerouting drywall through a different vendor." "You're terrifying when you talk like that," he said. "I took a course in project management," she replied, smiling faintly. Figured if you were going to drag me into this world, I might as well learn how to swim in it. You didn't just learn, he said, handing the clipboard back. You made it your own. She looked at the growing structure, then back at him. I never thought I'd be doing something like this. You are, he said, and you're good at it. He reached for her hand, and they stood watching the workers for a moment, the city moving around them like it always did, fast and uncaring. But here, in this tiny pocket of dust and steel, it felt like time was finally aligning with where they were meant to be. That evening, Peyton returned to their apartment, her arms full of takeout containers and her boots dusty from the sight. She barely had time to set the bags down before Winston appeared from the hallway, jacket in hand, tie half knotted. You're going somewhere? She asked, towing off her boots. Dinner meeting with a potential partner, he said, but I can reschedule. She shook her head. Go. I'll eat without you and try not to finish the jasmine rice. He kissed her forehead. Save me some of the dumplings. Only if you come home with dessert. He left, and she wandered into the living room, opening a container to steal a bite. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that came with knowing someone would walk back through the door soon. She glanced at the table. A single envelope sat there, thick and cream-colored. Her name was written in Winston's handwriting. She opened it slowly, heart already racing. Inside was a folded page. On it, a single question, will you build the rest of forever with me? She blinked, then turned the envelope upside down. A small ring box tumbled out. When he returned later, she was sitting on the couch with the box in her lap. Took you long enough, she said, eyes bright. I figured you'd say yes. I figured you'd ask in some dramatic fashion. He sat beside her. I was going to, but I realized you don't need grand, you just need real. She slid the ring onto her finger. You're lucky I like both. They didn't plan a massive wedding. Instead, they rented a small greenhouse garden in Brooklyn, invited only the people who mattered, and said their vows beneath hanging ferns and fairy lights. Scarlett gave a toast that was unexpectedly moving. Mia cried through the entire ceremony. And when Winston kissed Peyton at the altar, the world felt unshakably right. Afterward, they escaped to a private villa in the south of France. No schedules, no meetings, just long walks through olive groves, late-night wine under starlit skies, and mornings tangled in linen sheets with no reason to rush. On their last night there, Peyton stood on the terrace looking out over the hills. I still think about that first day, she said, not turning around, how I handed you the wrong drink. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. You didn't. She looked over her shoulder. Yes, I did. No, he said, you handed me the right one, you just didn't know it yet. When they returned to New York, the Midtown Clinic opened its doors. Peyton's name was on the donor plaque beside Winston's, not because she asked for it, but because he insisted. Clients came. The waiting room filled. People walked in with burdens and walked out with hope, and every time she passed through the lobby, Peyton remembered what it felt like to believe she didn't belong in a world like this. Now, she welcomed others into it. One rainy Sunday, as thunder rolled softly beyond the windows, she sat curled on the couch with a book in one hand and her other hand resting over her stomach. Winston was beside her, flipping through building plans for a future site in Harlem. I've been thinking about names, she said casually. He looked up. For what? She raised an eyebrow. For the small human we're going to meet in a few months. His expression shifted entirely, like something cracked open inside his chest. You're serious, she nodded. He set the papers aside and knelt in front of her, both hands over hers. I didn't think it was possible to love you more, he whispered. Then you'd better start adjusting your expectations. They spent the next hour brainstorming names, laughing, disagreeing, circling back, and finally landing on one that felt perfect. Because everything about them had always been imperfectly perfect. They didn't need a mansion or a yacht or a magazine spread, just each other. And the life they were building moment by moment, mistake by mistake, love by love, together. Always.